My personal friend and classmate, Daniel Trask, went missing in 2011. His website will be in the description below. He was also featured in one of David Paulide's books as one of the cases that fit the cluster. I have been in correspondence with Mr. Paulide's investigators as to give them more in-depth personal information about Daniel. I have known Daniel for over 6 years. He used to steal, party, do drugs, and he was not spiritual. He was quite selfish and greedy. He also took my sunglasses and never gave them back to me because he was the quote-unquote cool kid. That is, until he had an experience in Almira and was found in a cornfield in the dark, walking aimlessly with no shoes. He was put under psychiatric evaluation and deemed unstable. But after that experience, everything changed. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He was silent. He would see 2 dark entities in the corner of his room at all times, watching him and throwing off his covers that he had to move in with his brother because he was in so much fear. He gave all the belongings he stole/took from everyone and returned them immediately. He began to live like a hermit, not the jock popular guy he was. He would grow his own vegetables, refused to go anywhere, refused to carry a cell phone. He became ungroomed. He stopped caring for himself and took shelter in the woods. He gave back my sunglasses, finally, after 2 years of not seeing them, and returned his brother's leather jacket that he stole. He gave all his money away and just left on frequent trips to go into the wild. His brother, a good friend of mine, confided in telling me that Daniel told him he saw strange blue-type orbs coming out of the lakes he walked around and following him on several occasions. They said they keep watching him and that he had 2 encounters with blue beings who told him he has to change his life around, or else. He said he didn't listen the first time, and maybe that's why those bad entities he began to see in his room began to plague him. However, the strange thing these blue entities told him was that he was one of the chosen ones, and that he has a special purpose, which does not make much sense to me, since if these entities were good, why was Daniel able to see the bad ones in his room? Or were these bad entities part of a deception? I'm not sure what to think, but that is beyond what the book says about him, considering I am closer to him. Daniel was found in 2015. Unfortunately, he's deceased. By the way, the link I provided on Daniel Trask shows him drawing the Eye of Providence, or the Illuminati Eye, but he called it the Eye of Providence. There is strong correlation between David Paulide's research and Ted Gunderson's research, who was head of the FBI. I strongly recommend everyone watch their YouTube interviews for further analysis. Thank you for your time. At around 1:46 p.m., roughly 16 minutes after leaving school, Tristan was spotted on CCTV footage from a shop inside the train station. Standing nearby him at the time was an adult male, but the footage is too blurry to make out a description of the man. In fact, it's impossible to tell if the two are communicating with one another, or are even aware of each other's presence. Despite being assaulted and choked unconscious, Tristan had been dragged into a tunnel. While unconscious, he had been dragged to the edge of the walkway, which overlooked a small egress of the nearby river. There, investigators would theorize that his throat had been cut from ear to ear, with the wound being deep enough to reach the spine. He was then stabbed numerous times, and investigators would theorize that the young man had been bled into the river, so to speak. I apologize for the phrasing, but I'm at a loss for any other words to match the description of events given by police. After a few minutes of this had passed, the killer of the young man then committed perhaps the most gruesome act of all, and began mutilating the body of 13-year-old Tristan Brübach. Investigators would note that the boy's testicles had been removed from his body, and a section of his thigh and upper leg had been cut off. These body parts were then removed from the scene, likely taken by the culprit. Police were unable to find Tristan's backpack, so it was theorized that the killer had absconded from the scene with it. After this incredibly brutal assault and mutilation, Tristan's body was then posed to look like he was sleeping in the Brübach tunnel. It is unknown how long, exactly, he had been laying there before his discovery at around 5 p.m. Have you ever heard of Sergeant Terry Yaki? He's another case of an interesting character who gets suicided under suspicious circumstances. Terry was a first responder at the OKC bombing, and he went on to become a hero during the event because he had saved a bunch of people and risked his life numerous times. Being one of the first men on the scene, he saw and heard some things that maybe he shouldn't have. After the attack, he was being pressured to lie about what he had witnessed, but he refused to do it. To make matters worse, he began collecting evidence about what he had seen and evidence of the cover-up he was witnessing, such as how the FBI was relying on witness testimony from officers who were not present on the scene. Terry was set to be honored with a Medal of Valor for his actions on the day of the bombing, but a day before the award ceremony, he mysteriously committed suicide. The last time Terry was heard from, he was on the phone with his ex-wife, telling her that federal agents were pursuing him and he was trying to escape. When his body was found, it revealed that he had committed suicide in a strange fashion. He was said to have slit his wrists and neck, causing him to nearly bleed to death in his car, and then miraculously climbed over a barbed wire fence. He was then purported to have walked over a mile's distance through a nearby field, and eventually shooting himself in the side of the head. No weapons were found at the scene. Father Alfred Joseph Kunz was a Catholic priest who was found with his throat slit in his Roman Catholic church in Dane, Wisconsin. The still unsolved murder investigation has been described as the most expensive and time-consuming investigation in Dane County's history. Kunz, though he continued to say the Latin Mass, also said the Mass in English and was in communion with his diocesan bishop. Father Kunz was a well-known expert in canon law, so he knew how to walk the lines. Bill Brophy, a spokesman for the Madison, Wisconsin Catholic Diocese, said shortly after his murder, Kunz was a pastor at the church for 32 years before his death. Prior to his death, Kunz had his own radio show and had been a close associate of Malachi Martin, an author and exorcist. After Kunz was murdered, Martin alleged that the priest had been killed by Luciferians, and said Kunz had performed several exorcisms before his death. Martin said Kunz felt his life was in danger in the weeks before his murder. Kunz's friend, Abbot Ryan St. Anne Scott, felt Kunz's murder was related to Kunz's investigation of sexual abuse scandals in the diocese. The Dane County Sheriff's Department also investigated a calf mutilation 15 miles from Kunz's church the day before his murder that a farmer attributed to a cult. Kunz had allegedly been investigating reports of homosexuality and sexual abuse by priests within the Diocese of Springfield, Illinois. On March 4th, 1998, at 7 a.m., the body of Father Alfred J. Kunz was found in the hallway of St. Michael's School. The school is in the village of Dane, population approximately 600, located in rural Dane County, 5 miles northwest of Madison, Wisconsin, the state capital. Kunz was the victim of a homicide. His throat was cut with an edged weapon, severing the carotid artery. He died as a result of blood loss. The body was discovered by a teacher arriving at the school and was found lying in the hallway near the door to the father's living quarters in the school. All the doors to the school were locked, and there was no sign of forced entry. Kunz was a traditional Roman Catholic priest who had served at St. Michael Church for 32 years. He had strong traditional Orthodox Roman Catholic views that were evidenced by the fact that he conducted Latin masses as well as English masses. He was an expert in canon law, the law of the church, and as such, many people nationwide consulted with him. On the night prior to the homicide, Kunz participated in the taping of a religious radio talk program, which was to be aired at a later date. After the taping at 10 p.m., he was dropped off at St. Michael Church/school by another priest. Subsequent to that, at about 10:30 p.m., he had a phone conversation with another priest. Investigators believe the killer is someone that Kunz knew and is familiar with the village and St. Michael's. Kunz was probably not fearful of the killer. The attack was cowardly, unprovoked, and unexpected. The particular motive is unknown, but may be related to jealousy, revenge, betrayal, or any other issue which was personal to the killer. Alfred Kunz was laughing the last time Peter Kelly saw him alive. The pair had just finished co-hosting a faith-based radio show in Monroe on the evening of March 3, 1998. That included a guest appearance by their good friend, Reverend Charles Fior. As a 67-year-old Kunz was preparing to leave with Fior, Kelly told Kunz his strict adherence to conservative traditional Catholic teachings, including a vow to live in poverty, would make a good story. That prompted Fior to joke that the story should be titled From Rags to Rags. Kunz, who grew up on a farm in Fenimore during the Depression, responded with a hearty laugh, according to Kelly. "He certainly saw the humor," Kelly said. A private investigator from Hoffman Estates, who studied the Kunz murder while doing research on another case involving a priest a few years ago, said during a 2015 interview that the sheriff's office was doing a credible job with its investigation. "There's no physical evidence to incriminate a suspect, and there are no witnesses," Thomas Hampson said. Hampson, who did intelligence work for the U.S. Air Force and the state of Illinois, and now heads an alliance that tracks down child sexual predators, believes detectives know who murdered Kunz, but the person they needed to make the case stand up in court was not forthcoming with them, probably out of self-preservation, and that person is dead. Hampson also had an opinion about the outspoken Kunz, who was a polarizing figure in the church and elsewhere during his 32 years at St. Michael. After debunking every conspiracy theory and wild claim that came forth about Kunz, including that he had affairs with women and was killed by a jealous lover, Hampson said he came to the conclusion that Kunz wasn't anything but a decent guy. Kelly learned that Kunz was murdered via phone call from Fior. He recalled that the retired Dominican priest, who died in 2003, started the conversation by saying, "Peter, are you sitting down?" Soon after, Kelly was at St. Michael talking to the teacher who found Kunz's body. Kelly recalls feeling sorry for the teacher, who was shivering in the cold air as he explained how he got covered in Kunz's blood while checking to see if he was still alive. "I can still see him sitting in my car with my long black top coat, trying to get him warm," Kelly said. Kelly says he has been thinking about how the past 20 years have flown by for him. He says he still closes his eyes and can see Kunz laughing as he walked out of the Monroe radio station just hours before he was killed. He says he also thinks about the drive he made to St. Michael several hours later, and how he stood in the cold air on the morning of March 4th, wondering who killed his friend. Just 3 days short of Henry Lee Lucas's scheduled exit from this world, Lucas became the first, and to date only, recipient of Governor Bush's compassionate conservatism. The official rationale for this act of mercy was, apparently, that the evidence on which Lucas was sentenced did not support his conviction. There was a possibility that Henry was in fact innocent of the crime for which he was convicted. Never mind that many of the 130 death row inmates who did not get special gubernatorial attention prior to their executions had credible claims of innocence that were met with by nothing but scorn and mockery. Lucas claimed that he was trained by a nationwide satanic call in a mobile paramilitary training camp in the Florida Everglades. Henry further claimed the leaders of the camp were so impressed with his handling of a knife that he was allowed to serve as an instructor. Following his training, Henry claimed that he served the cult in various ways, including as a contract killer and as an abductor of children, whom he delivered to a ranch in Mexico near Juarez. Once there, they were used in the production of child pornography and for ritual sacrifices. Lucas's partner Otis Toole confirmed much of Lucas's claims in an interview with Billy Bob Barton of Boiled Angel. I know that Sandra London was able to confirm parts of Lucas's story as well. An associate of Lucas provided authorities with a map he had drawn, marking cult ranches south of the border. One of them was later identified by authorities as the base of operations for the Matamoros cult. No one wants to believe the cult story. The TV people cut it out. The writers don't want to write about it. Most serial killers are actually an artificial construct of government and law enforcement bodies. The purposes are, number 1, create and maintain a climate of fear. Number 2, provide cover for the violent activities of cults supported by U.S. intelligence agencies. These cults are seated to provide farms of conditioned assassins, prostitutes, and various types of facilitators. They also provide a cover for drug, arms, and human trafficking, and the production of child pornography. They also institute and encourage violent and antisocial activities pursuant to number 1. And number 3, provide cover for contract hits relating to ongoing drug, arms, and human trafficking. On January 11th, 2013, Kendrick Johnson was found rolled up in a wrestling mat upside down in the school's gym where he attended. The police performed an autopsy and ruled the death accidental. They said that students would often put their shoes in or behind the mats, and when Kendrick went to retrieve them, he accidentally fell into it and suffocated when nobody noticed. However, when the family hired an independent pathologist to perform a second autopsy, the results was completely different. He died of blunt force trauma, not suffocation. As a result, his family came forward and claimed that Kendrick was murdered, and the case was reopened by police as a homicide investigation on October 31st, 2013. The autopsy also discovered that his body was stuffed full of newspapers after the first autopsy. The funeral home that received the body after his original autopsy claims that there were no organs given to them, and that the police claimed that these organs were destroyed by natural process and discarded. It was also later revealed that the clothing he was wearing when he died were also missing. The funeral home chose to use newspaper instead of the more commonly used sawdust or cotton. The Secretary of State later determined that it was inappropriate, but that there was no real wrongdoing. In November, surveillance tapes were released to CNN investigators. 2 of the cameras are missing footage. One is missing an hour and 5 minutes of footage, and the other 2 hours and 10 minutes. The cameras are motion activated and didn't cover the place where Kendrick died. The footage shows him walking towards the mats at about 1 p.m., and then nothing else until the next frame, where the kids are playing basketball in the same gym. During the following investigation by police, more information was discovered. Around the rolled up mats where Johnson was found appeared to be schoolwork, such as a folder and a physical science textbook. Along one of the walls was blood splatter. In the girls' restroom of the gym, paper towels covered in blood were in the trash. The shoes he was wearing were found tucked in the mat alongside his legs, which would only be possible after he fell in. There were also a pair of Adidas shoes on the scene, with one outside the mats and the matching shoe under his head inside the mat. And most strange, the shoe under Kendrick's head had blood pooling around it, but none on it, which would be impossible if it were there being dripped on, as claimed. The width of the mats were also measured to have the center hole to be about 14.5 inches wide, but Kendrick's shoulders are 19 inches wide. Then comes the investigation into some of the suspects, which is really weird as well. Brandon Bell and his brother's father is an FBI agent who hired a lawyer and instructed his children to not speak to police, and were the only students to refuse an interview. 2 years before Kendrick's death, he allegedly got into a fight with the younger brother. However, Brandon's alibi is that he was at a wrestling tournament in another city, and there is no proof when they left. They claim they left around 1 p.m. while Kendrick entered the gym at 1:09 p.m., but the school bus logs show the bus that they were on didn't leave until 4 p.m. On the other hand, the wrestling coach's cell phone records show the team was in a different city at 1:53, meaning they were on the road by the time Kendrick was inside the mat. Even more confusing is that Brandon was weighed in at the tournament, but the weigh-in wasn't scheduled to begin until 4 p.m. Even more odd is that Brandon was seen crisscrossing the hallway in front of the old gym that Kendrick died in on the surveillance recording.